by name each time that we speak and comply with the virtual meeting laws. And let's try to be, of course, you guys are always very adequate and always courteous, so I don't have to worry about that part. Votes are going to be conducted by roll call to comply with the laws around virtual meetings. And Elena Kagan will call roll each time a vote is needed. And at this time, I'll ask Elena to conduct a roll call.
Thank you, Ms. Laney.
Mm-hmm.
So I will. Okay. Just pulling up my spreadsheet. So I will say the jurisdiction. If the delegate and the alternate are here, delegate, please stay here first. Aberdeen.
Here.
Thank you. Chatham County.
Mike Dasher here.
Thank you. City of Durham. Durham County. Garner. Hillsborough.
Kathleen Ferguson, Hillsborough, here.
Thank you. Johnson County. Lee County.
Bill Carver here.
Moore County. Orange County. Pittsboro. Princeton.
John Raines is present and taking a phone call.
Sanford.
Rebecca Salmon's here.
Thank you. Wake County. We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. Okay, at this time, we're gonna review the agenda. Does anyone have any changes or any additions or? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and approve the agenda. Next, we have presentations and recognitions. I assume there is none. Anybody have any presentations they want to make? No? Okay. So we're going to go on to our next step is business. Discussions of board of delegates and executive committee meeting changes and bylaws revisions. Director Lee Worsley is going to do that for us.
All right. Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the executive committee. It's good to see everybody here in our new space and virtually. We're really excited to have you here. For those that are virtual, we're actually sitting in our Triangle J conference room. And for those that are present, if you'd like a quick tour after we're done, I'd be happy to do that for you. So what we're going to talk about now is some proposed changes to the Board of Delegates and Executive Committee meetings, and also potential bylaw changes. And first and foremost, with the change in name, a revision of the bylaws is necessary, just basically to change the name Triangle J to Central Pines. But we've also been talking quite a bit about how we can make sure that we're utilizing the talents and the time wisely of our board and the executive committee. And we realize, I want to say, first of all, thank you for your service on the committee and on the board. We know you're very busy, and we know that you have families and jobs, and you're an elected official for your local jurisdiction first, and we get that. But we also know that you're committed to Central Pines, and we want to make sure that your time here is spent wisely, and that you add the value that we know each of you can. So we're proposing some changes that will actually end up in more meetings probably not more meetings for you individually, but more meetings overall in terms of for staff and for others. And we think that's really great because that gets us more engagement and more sort of a deep dive into each of our focus areas. So Elena, if you want to go to the next slide. Let me talk a little bit about the process of what's gotten us to this point. I mentioned this already. The bylaws need to be changed due to the change in name. Oops. Oh. What did I do here?
I think if you go back to that, that
This one?
order, yeah.
All right. Sorry. Folks in the room, I covered up most of the PowerPoint with the Zoom. So we talked about needing the bylaws changed just due to the name change. Also, in our strategic plan, there are several strategies that align with what we're talking about today. All really in the member engagement strategy area. So developing engagement strategies for each focus area, strategically engaging our core partners, creating a program for stronger elected official and manager engagement, and improving comprehensive process for collecting and translating our focus area activities to members. So we developed a document which you all got a few months ago and was included again in your packet that contemplated some potential changes. This document was shared with the last year's officers, and we had a meeting several months ago. Got a lot of good feedback from the officers, made some changes based on that feedback. Also have had some conversations with our leadership team internally, and we've incorporated those changes. So what we're doing now is presenting it to you all for input and for direction on how you would like to go. You could decide to move the whole thing forward to the board for consideration. Certainly, you may have suggested changes, or you may want to hold and talk about it at your next meeting. And it's really up to you how you want to move forward with this. And also, the attorney has reviewed all the changes in the bylaws as well. Next slide. So I'm just going to high level highlight each of the impacts on the different boards. So, of course, our Board of Delegates is the official governing board of Central Pines. The proposal would move the number of board meetings from 9 scheduled. It's really 7 because the board has typically always canceled July and December. So from 9 to 6 scheduled meetings. And we really want to emphasize with the board in-person, interactive, and worth the trip content. So we want to make sure we want to see the board in person. The proposal outlines sort of a proposed schedule for what we would do at the board meetings. And we can talk through that if you'd like. The board will retain all its current authority. That only changing meeting dates and the structure of the meeting to try to make it a lot more impactful and high level and strategic for the 47 board members that are part. The schedule for the meetings would be January, April, June, August, October, and December. As I mentioned, each meeting would serve a particular purpose. For instance, I think it's the April meeting, we would try to do something in Raleigh around the General Assembly, some sort of maybe legislative reception or preview of the General Assembly session. I think October we propose maybe every year to have a member visit where we would actually go to another one of our member communities and learn from them on some things that they're doing. So this is just a couple examples. And then also a subcommittee would provide reports to the board during each meeting. We'll talk about the subcommittees a little bit later, but they'll be aligned. The subcommittee as proposed would be aligned with each focus area. So let me pause right there and see if there's any questions. And of course, the board can have lots of conversation, but I want to stop right now just on the Board of Delegates piece and see if there's any feedback, questions, anything that you.
I'm thinking December is, unless the December is held early, I think it's gonna be canceled some more. So, a shift somehow, but I don't see, just given how, in practice, December ends up being squished into 2 weeks for most people.
Yeah.
And trying to get, all, everyone's got their own special, and so anyway, long and short, I would not recommend a December meeting.
Thank you for that. So we have had some conversations about the December meeting. Really right in line with with what you're saying, Delegate Ferguson. We struggled a little bit with December. The reason why we've got the December meeting there right now is we'd really like to do some sort of year-end celebration that the board would be involved in. I think we could easily shift that to January, but we also know that December to January, sometimes we also have shifts of board members. And so that was the rationale, but I agree. We certainly talked, if we're going to have a December meeting, it would be the first week or two.
I saw too on the bylaws, let me check, unless I misread it. I'm sorry, not the bylaw. Oh, on the committees being a pathway to the Board of Delegate appointments. I'm not sure what that really means, because that still resides with the member government, so is there a thought of us following, this leads into the greater forum thing. Are we thinking about expanding our delegates to include non-electeds?
No, that's a great question. That was not contemplated. Having non-electeds on the board. The thought behind that is we would, at least how it's proposed right now, the subcommittees would be open not only to Board of Delegate members, but there may be elected officials on the local government elected members that might have an interest in a different area. And so it would be a way for them to get more engaged in the regional council. And then of course, the decision for appointment is always up to that local board, but it could be a pathway for an elected official to show interest, get more information. That's what we're meaning by pathway. Maybe a better word would be exposure.
I would say exposure, but I would also, on these committees, I know way back when, it included staff and electeds,
Sure.
and I thought it was a good mix, and I would encourage that.
Absolutely.
I remember, at least on I want to say it was the smart growth, and this is like, I hope someone's memory is better than mine, because I have vague memories of it including neither staff nor elected, but community experts that were on there. And again, I thought that was a nice mix, and it gave the council greater visibility in the community and among subject matter experts, which given, ends up thinking of our charge on that leadership and thought leadership role. I would like us to explore having that in these committees.
Yes, ma'am.
Also.
I agree 100%. That's part of what's contemplated is that it would
Okay, I
be a
wasn't-
mix.
Apologies,
No,
I wasn't
no.
clear from
No,
the
it's
way it
fine.
was written.
No, I appreciate you asking the question because it's certainly the thought that we've had. Yes, ma'am. I can move on to the next slide, which is the executive committee. And of course, we can come back and talk about any of these and when we're done. So this committee, the executive committee, the thought around the executive committee is that the meetings would actually increase for the executive committee. It would increase from 3 to 5, February, March, May, September, and November. We would, unless you all want to meet in person, we would maybe only hold those virtual to ease your travel demands, so that, it's just the board of delegate meetings that involve travel. But we would try to shift as much of the routine business that we can to the executive committee, rather than to the full board. I mean, we love seeing everybody, but asking somebody to drive an hour for one budget amendment, right, or something like that is just, that's a big ask, right? So we'd rather shift that sort of routine business to the executive committee, do it virtually, budget amendment, contracts, grants, other things. We would then, of course, incorporate a better comprehensive executive committee report to the full board in their agenda packet. And if they had questions, we could certainly talk about it at the board meeting. And again, the purpose is to shift that routine business to the executive committee so the board can be better preserved, because we know you have a limited time. So we want to preserve that time for the higher level strategic coming together, convening, learning from each other. That's so valuable. So that is, and again, we don't have to meet 5 times. If we don't have business, we could always cancel the meeting, but maybe have at least on the calendar 5 meetings to make sure that any business that does need to be transacted could be, if needed. So that's the idea behind the executive committee changes.
Did you put February and March together because of the budget time frame?
Yes, I think that was
The motivation?
April. Yeah, it was trying to time the board meetings so that we could get the budget in front of them and not have additional board meetings. So yes, sir, that was the idea. We tried an on month, off month, and we just couldn't make it work with presenting the audit and then the budget to the full board. We couldn't figure out a way to do it.
To me, it makes sense. And I mean, I look at this in some ways as an experiment. And if we find that it's not workable, we can always make adjustments. But
Your peer organizations, Piedmont Triad, or do they do anything similar? Or?
It's really, there's a big mix, but yes, I have found that several of the other COGS regional councils utilize their executive committee a little more heavily for that sort of routine business. Piedmont Triad, their full board, I think it's like 60, I think, and so they only meet quarterly. And their executive committee really takes up a lot of the day sort of business.
And
So
they're
we decided, again, how many times a year would you did say maybe six times a year that the committee would meet, or is that what we came up
Yes.
with? Okay.
So yes, ma'am, the full board right now is proposed would meet 6 times a year, but that includes that December meeting, which we agree might be hard to schedule, so maybe it's only 5. And then the executive committee would be, as proposed right now, would be 5. Yes, ma'am.
Bill Carver, Lee County, what procedure do you have to follow to cancel a meeting
The board chair has authority
to do
to
that?
cancel. Yes,
I
sir.
got you.
Yes, sir. And usually what would happen is I'd say, hey, we don't have any agenda items. I'd ask the board chair, hey, we don't have anything to meet now. Is it okay?
Yeah.
If you want to meet, we can meet, and they'll decide whether to do that or not.
Okay.
Don Rains, Town of Princeton, I would suggest that the December meeting be be an abbreviated meeting, the first of weeks in December, and it would be refreshments and light holiday.
That makes sense. That way you can have the end of the year and.
Sure. And then if it doesn't work, we'll figure it out.
Exactly.
Well, you could almost,
Yeah.
yeah, you could almost do it where, I mean, we could time it or figure it out where it doesn't have to be it would be an official meeting, but if you don't get a quorum, it wouldn't matter because we wouldn't have anything. So it could almost be like a reception, or it could be you know, and if we get 20, we get 20. If we get 40, we get 40. So we certainly hear you on the December, so we'll think through some options.
And it could be a meeting where you've gone over your goals for the year and awards be handed out to appropriate staff.
Yes, and we also want to also make sure we're recognizing, giving the chair an opportunity to recognize board members who are leaving. And with our rebrand, we've thought about some different ways we can do that. That's a little more unique than just a plaque. So, and again, if that needs to wait to January, we can. But we could certainly, we'll think through it.
Is that a time when maybe we could, you know, we may have new people coming in because of the elections that we could, you know, maybe let them be introduced to the regional council, our Central Pines. Is that a time? we
Yes,
could
ma'am.
maybe introduce them? That would be a time because you can ask, they can ask questions, and it's not going to be like a formal meeting, right? So.
Right. Yes,
But even
ma'am.
sometime when they can mingle and ask questions, because we may have new people coming on, and they will certainly be, usually I think they are sworn in December. So
Yes.
it may be in time to make the meeting.
That's a great point. Yeah, I mean, we could certainly invite those that we know are going to be coming onto the board in January to be part of that, especially if it's informal. It's not, you know, you could have it sort of a floating thing. We've also talked about some potential opportunities for doing something different around orientation, and so and broadening that to not only orientation for our board, but some sort of regional orientation for newly electeds across the region. And we've had some good conversations with our friends at the MPOs about maybe even combining that with some of the orientation they already do, so that we're not killing folks with meetings, but we're combining. And then additionally, Ms. Laney, that would work really good, because in January we were thinking January would be sort of the formal introduction of the new board. We already have a photographer. We want to do a board picture to put in our space over here. So yeah, that I think that would work really well.
And by January, between, you know, when the committee assignments are, some are in December when they're sworn in, some come in January. So having, I like having the orientation and having a chance for those that do have their assignments, or we know, you know, coming in early as an introduction. I remember when I first got elected, I was introduced to a couple of my committees, not this one, but a couple others. Technically, before I was sworn in, I It was one of those fluky things. What I wanted, nobody else wanted. So, and that really made a difference when by the time the real meetings had
Sure.
started up.
So let's move on to the subcommittee proposal. If you can advance the slide. So what we've been thinking about are the potential of establishing subcommittees, and Ms. Ferguson discussed this. We've had some committees that have been almost like subcommittees. I think that what we have not really had is a real good connection of those subcommittees up to the board. And so we're trying to think through how we can have meaningful subcommittees that are inclusive, expose the regional council more broadly across the region, and give the board members and other elected officials opportunities to sort of dig in a little bit more in a specific area, knowing that, I mean, if you want to dig into all 6 focus areas, wonderful, but I mean, realistically, we know you're limited on time. So the proposal is to establish a subcommittee for each of our focus areas. We need to think a little bit more around the aging and the transportation. The Area Agency on Aging already has an aging advisory committee. So I think it may just be some tweaks to that committee, or a little more formally incorporating that committee into some interaction with the board. Transportation, there's so many transportation committees right now. We're just we're being a little careful on that one. We don't want to just create another committee for another committee's sake. So we want to have some more thought around that. But we think there's real opportunities around the other focus areas. There'd also be we've had what's been called a legislative committee. We would sort of rebrand that to more of a regional policy committee to really sort of dig in on policies, federal and or state, that affect the focus areas, and seeing how we can, as a region, weigh in on those. The subcommittee chair, what's being contemplated, and we can change any of this, would be that the subcommittee chair would be a member of the board and would be appointed by the board chair each year. We would hope that each board member would express interest on serving on a subcommittee, and the chair would appoint as those individuals maybe express interest. And then to your questions, Ms. Ferguson, rounded out by other local government member elected officials, staff, stakeholders, or others with a subject matter interest or expertise. And the purpose of this, I mentioned, more people engaged in our work, giving us a better idea of what's going on in the region, getting better feedback on what we're doing and what we maybe should be doing to better align our programs to what the region needs. And then also providing a better line of sight for our focus area leads to the board's policy direction, and aligning the strategic plan with that. And there was one more point I was going to make, and it's gone out of my head, so that's not even important. So those are some thoughts on the subcommittees. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, there's one thing, I don't know if this is the time to jump in and say it, but I think that we do need to try to get some of these municipalities that never come, try to get them involved. I know there's a few in Moore County. You listen to the roll call and you never hear anyone. I mean, they're part of it, and that would be getting more people involved, and people involved that's really a member, but we don't see them very often.
I agree. Yes, ma'am.
Don Rains, Princeton, and it may be defined the way it needs to be defined now, but under environment and resilience, you got DEQ. I was just emphasize water and sewer, maybe a subcategory in, stormwater and flood, maybe another
Mhm.
category that just defines that. Instead of just working with DEQ issues, there are more defined areas.
Yes, sir. Thank you for that.
And with, community and economic development broadband.
Yes, ma'am. Good point.
Do we have much to do with things like this LME, MCO realignment that's happening? Do we get involved in the healthcare issues that much?
We've traditionally not. Um,
Well, that's so strongly a legislative issue determined by the General Assembly right now, for example,
Yes.
reducing the number that they have, et cetera. I would think people in our region who our LME, MCO might be going away.
Yeah.
It'd be
Yeah.
nice to have a voice. I don't know, you have a better sense of that than I do.
Yeah, and so the LME, MCO, or the mental health entities, and yeah, there's been lots of alignment conversations. For those sort of things, some county commissioners association sort of takes
They
the
do.
lead. I think where we could possibly have some assistance is, if there's some data or some things that we could do to sort of help shape the issue for our region specifically, that would then help the counties advocate. We've done that before, like with the tier system.
Mm.
I think that's where we could add some
Still makes
potential
sense.
value.
Thank you.
Yes,
Makes
sir.
sense.
Thank you.
Well, I'm glad you bring that up because I'm thinking, because along those lines, given that we're still trying to advocate for alignment with the regional councils and the LME MCO, the framework, what better way than our member governments to support, with their their county officials, but also their legislative delegations. If they are brought in and, we may not be working on the very same pieces that the county commissioners, but just by involving them, with regional policy interests, some of the advocacy things that we're looking at the state, the state council level, that helps strengthen both the county commissioners and, the COGS. So I think I think Bill is onto something.
Yeah.
And, folding that in, and whether, we look at it, within the community economic development, however we fold it in, or regional policy, but I think there's some room without duplicating or stepping on toes.
That's a great point. So the COGS have made clear through their state advocacy agenda that, the state, when they're thinking about regional entities, that they ought to at least think about the regional council rather than going out and creating different regions, new region, duplicative regions. So I think that could be an opportunity, not just for LMEs, but other things to sort of weigh in. That consistency among the regions is important, so that y'all aren't, all over the place with different issues.
Bill Carver, Lee County. I think the problem is, and I look at Little Lee County and the influence that we have on this LME MCO decision and how remote we're feeling
Yeah.
once we get incorporated with this big organization. And if we could raise our hand in a cog and say, well, wait a minute, how about we pool together and get some more interest on that? And it has to do not right now with the way things are aligned, but in the future, what's going to happen? We're the whole idea of whether or not mental health is responding the way it should be, and accepting the fact that the changes we made, 10 years ago haven't worked out so well. And I actually don't know. And the thing is, I wouldn't want to twitter away a lot of effort if we didn't feel like we'd have some influence on what's happening in Raleigh. Because that's where they're making the decisions.
Yes, sir.
So again, that's a question of numbers, I think. So you put counties together, maybe it make a difference. Live in hope, die in desperation, but.
This is Mrs. Kathleen, Ferguson, Hillsborough. Thank you for reminding me, because, but, numbers, are the, even Raleigh, they listen to their electeds, they listen to their constituents. And when there is a drumbeat of consistency, that makes a difference. And I'm thinking in terms of a couple things, when we look at what we're doing at, with the state cog level, how are we utilizing, how are things, we're pretty good about cascading up. And within our council, I'm not so sure we're really good about cascading across from those where we're missing strength in numbers. And so whether it's the aging services and some of the issues that we with the software issues, what again, if it's just the forum, that's one thing. When it is entire councils on specific issues, that's a lot stronger and harder to ignore. And I think across each of these, there's going to be some of those issues and tied in. And where so that's also a long way of saying that these subcommittees, I think, it gives a structure to support us far beyond what we're thinking of in some of these, the yearly topics per se that we started off looking at. But
Yeah, let's think more about that as a staff and come back with some ideas. I think you're right. Just need to think through some implementation strategies in that.
Here's a random question. Do we have a registered lobbyist?
Well, yes, actually, we do. I was saying, no, we don't, but we do. We have a registered lobbyist for the federal level. For the state level, the COG Association has a lobbyist for the state.
The COG Association,
Yes,
not
sir.
this.
Not this COG.
I got you. Thank you.
Sir. Yes, sir.
And Bill, Don Raines, Princeton, I can tell you that our Chris, our lobbyist, is really good at focusing. He's someone that's respected by all parties in the General Assembly. And on our legislative day, we see the right people, and they know who we are.
Cool.
it's how the COGS got money for the ARPA funds and for resiliency. It's through that.
I think this could be more defined. I think we could do it later, but if this is on the consent agenda, I'd like to go ahead and proceed with it when we get there.
Yeah, so it's not on the consent agenda. What I was gonna more see is how you all felt about, I'm hearing some tweaks we need to make to it. And I guess the question is, does the executive committee feel comfortable moving this forward to the board in October for consideration? The alternate would be just stopping it here and not talking about it anymore, or making some more tweaks and then bringing it back to the executive committee. Your next meeting's not till February, but we can always.
I would support moving it to the greater board, and that way bringing the tweaks and moving forward in that way. I wouldn't want to see this. I don't feel a need to, as the executive committee personally, of seeing it again before the board.
Do we make a motion here? Can we do that?
It would be on the
Real
consent
quick.
agenda.
You could always move it to the consent agenda and make a motion at that point if you'd like. I would like to make sure I highlight the bylaw changes, because that's a companion to this, to make sure you all are comfortable with that. But if y'all are ready to sort of give me direction to put this on the board agenda, you could place it on the consent agenda and vote on it then.
Let's
Or you could
do,
vote on it separately. It's up to you all.
let's do the bylaw changes and then we'll do both.
Right. Next slide. All right, so here are the highlights of the bylaw changes, and there's a track changes version in your agenda. Changing all references from Triangle J to Central Pines, changing the meeting dates. It's not locking you into the dates that we talked about. Rather, it allows you to adopt a meeting schedule by the 1st of October of the previous year. Right now, your meeting dates are locked in the bylaws. So this will give you all a little more flexibility.
Mhm.
Clarify the quorum to address instances where there are delegates and alternates that aren't appointed by a local government member. We have a couple where there's not a delegate or an alternate. So that should not count on your quorum. So we're clarifying that. The bylaws allows for me to be called the president, and I don't think that's necessary. So that removes that provision.
Hail to the chief.
Clarifies that the director prepares the recommended budget. There was some old language in there around the treasurer cooperating and the executive committee. That's not how we've operated. Removes myself as the secretary to the board and clarifies that I designate a clerk, which is Beth. Removes section 5, that was around finance because it's in the charter. Changes the member assessment amount to the current amount that you all adopted in the budget. There is a provision that's highlighted that I wanted to highlight for you all. In 1996, the bylaws were changed. This is in section 7. It's page 3, section 7, membership assessments, last paragraph. Effective in 96, any payments required to support federal state funded programs will be paid by the responsible local government separate from membership assessment. I don't know if that ever was followed.
What does that mean?
So it basically means that I'll give you a good example. The MPO. So we help support the MPOs. And that is a federal and a state funded program. There was member assessment going in to help support our staff working on that program. Technically, according to the bylaws, we shouldn't have put any member assessment into that. We should have separately billed all the separate communities for that charge. And that we have not done that in practice forever. Now, the good news is that we've been having some conversations with the NPOs, and they have, and I really appreciate that, they have removed the requirement that we match the NPO money with 20%. So the NPOs are fully funding us, which we think is fair because the local governments fund the NPOs.
Yep.
And so there's no program that I know of that this applies to. And so the question is, we never followed it. So do we keep it in or do we strike it?
Does it, and this is a question I don't know, does it make sense to put in some modifying language where it's something that as needed or that leaves it as an option but not a requirement? And I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but
Right.
if there's some federal or state program, that's coming down And again, I don't know enough.
Before we opt to make it I'm not sure whether or not it should or shouldn't, and I hear what you're saying, but how much money are we talking about? About ballpark figure.
Well, it was about $70,000 that we were putting in for member assessments into the MPOs that now we're not going to have to do anymore. So that's coming, we'll be able to use that for other things. So there's not another federal or state funded program. And so what it's meaning is that if we go after a federal or state program that's just benefiting Lee County in Sanford, that it takes a 20% match, that we should be directly billing you for that 20%, and that it shouldn't be absorbed by the member assessment. That's what that's trying to say.
Right.
I don't know of anything that we have. I can go back and double check. I don't know of anything that we have right now that we've done the MPO change that this applies to.
Yeah, well, Bill Carver, Lee County, with what Catherine is saying, I understand you might want to reserve the right or possibility of being able to do it in the future, but at the same time, that kind of puts you in an interesting position of picking this county but not that county or whatever. So I recommend that we just delete it because it doesn't have a lot much impact. But that would be my opinion.
And then Don Raines for Princeton. I would concur, because if there is a situation that we have that this has to be, we can always have a resolution to that effect.
That makes sense.
We can, and we do a pretty good job that our staff does, that when we have a program that maybe benefits a community or two, they pitch in, right? And we have that conversation. This, I truly believe that this was part of, in the early 90s, there were several of our local government members that decided to leave Triangle J. And there was a big push for looking at different ways of funding the COG. And the COG assessment was cut basically in half. Our revenues, our local revenues, were basically cut in half from what we got from the local governments. And there's a lot of history about thinking about different ways, and I think this was part of that. I just don't think it ever got implemented.
I am supportive of striking it. My question really was just, because I don't feel confident enough to know if there's any, if there was or is any history behind it that it would be needed. And it sounds like it's not, and I'm comfortable with it being struck.
There was a lot of conversation in the early 90s about the philosophy about how the COG should be funded. And I think this is part of that. There's lots of newspaper articles in the library about there.
We don't have the history of some other COGs that almost folded, so get rid of it.
So that's it. Those are the substantive changes. So if the executive committee wishes to put it on the consent agenda, you could certainly do so to move this forward to the board for consideration with incorporating the suggestions that we've heard during the conversation.
Ms. Laney, whenever a motion is made to approve the consent agenda, someone will make a motion to add this to the consent agenda, if that's fine with you.
Okay. So that's just the bylaws, the other, we're gonna hold off on that?
Well, the bylaws in effect, the bylaws are being formally adopted, and what I would say is this other piece you all are endorsing, we move this concept to the board for conversation.
Right, but I was talking about the changes that we were considering for, you know, the meeting schedule and all that. Are we still gonna, you know, kick that around some more, or are we happy with it, or? I don't think that we're ready for that, do you? Does anybody
I
think?
think the conversation is that we endorse what's here, there may be other changes, but we're endorsing to move it to the full board at our next meeting.
Okay,
And I think we could say, we're endorsing for movement to the full board, with further adjustments and tweaks as discussed. And then secondly, adding, we'll add in the bylaws to the consent agenda.
okay. I think I got that. Okay, is there any more on this, or we're gonna move to the next? We talked about the budget and, the amendment. I think Hope Talley is supposed to speak on that.
Yes, ma'am. I think Hope is not on. Evidently, she had a power outage like 5 minutes
Okay.
before the board meeting started, so she texted Jenny and I. So I will do my best to cover this item just quickly. This is budget amendment number 3 for this fiscal year. This is adding should actually get to the budget amendment. There we go. This is adding about $300,000 to the budget. Several new projects, a new grant that we helped the town of Cameron receive, some additional funding for the Chatham County Urgent Repair Program, Transportation Division is being increased for a new City of Durham Communities to Clean Energy project. About $5,000 increase for additional revenue on our foreign trade zone, and another current project being increased by about $66,000 for the town of Cary CDBG project. And then finally, $62,000 increase in additional state funding for the RPO. So those are the amendments, and the budget amendment resolution is also attached for the executive committee's consideration on the consent agenda.
Okay. Okay, so we ready for the consent agenda? Or is there something else?
Yes, ma'am. I do need to mention one item. Thank you to Mayor Salmon for bringing this up. The RPO agreement that is in the consent agenda, there is a typo in it. Actually, a few typos in it. If you go to page 4 of the RPO agreement, the table there, I think it was just a copy paste error. You see the governmental body, it says County of Chatham, and then it says municipal member for Chatham County. And then it says County of Lee, but then it says Chatham. That should say Lee County. And then for Moore, municipal member for Moore County. We have the corrected version here for signature, but certainly wanted to point that out to you all before you considered it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. All right, so we're gonna go ahead with the consent agenda. And there's 2 items that we're adding to that, I believe. Or 2 corrections.
So this is Kathleen Ferguson, Hillsborough. I am making the motion to amend the consent agenda to include approval of the bylaws as discussed and presented, and movement of the subcommittee proposal forward to the general, the greater board of delegates for discussion, with the tweaks and further adjustments as discussed, included.
Okay, so that's gonna be part of the consent agenda. And
Correct.
the correction on the RPO, we mentioned that, right?
Yeah, yes, the amended RPM MOU as amended.
Yes, okay. So the consent agenda is draft minutes, June 28, 2023, and fiscal year 23-24 resolution 2023-0901, budget amendment number 3, and the RPO memorandum of understanding with all the changes that were so mentioned will be part of the consent agenda. Is that enough? Is that good?
Yes, ma'am.
You want a second?
Bill, you want a second?
I second the Bill Carver, Lee County, second.
Yes, since
Okay.
you and I are two,
Okay, that's true.
we read our minds.
Yes,
It's not a good thing.
Okay, so we got a motion in a second, right?
Yes, we do.
Okay. I think we have to do a roll call now. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you do the, who's gonna do?
I can do it whenever you're ready. This is, yeah, Elena will do it.
Elena, would you do the roll call, please?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
All right, and as a reminder for this vote, it's 1 vote per community. Apex. Aberdeen.
Here, Aberdeen approves.
Got you. Chatham County.
Mike Dasher, aye.
City of Durham.
Adriana Freeman, aye.
Thank you. Durham County.
Heidi Carter, aye.
Thank you. Hillsborough.
Kathleen Ferguson, Hillsborough, I.
Johnson County. Lee County.
Lee County, Bill Carver, aye.
Moore County. Orange County. Pittsboro. Princeton.
Don Rains, Town of Princeton, aye.
Thank you. Sanford.
Rebecca Salmon, City of Sanford, I.
Thank you. And Wake County. We have a unanimous vote.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Sorry, we have a unanimous vote. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so the consent agenda has been approved. Next, we have the executive director's report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not much to report. I mean, we got a lot going on, but I know we've had a lot of conversation on the proposed board changes. We're excited about the new space. I won't say give a lot of information, so we reserve some time for those that are here that might want to look through the space when we're done. I just want to say thank you for the board's support as we've made these transitions. And I really also want to thank the staff. They've done a tremendous job of being flexible and resilient as we've moved from one space to the other and done branding changes, and just there's just been a lot going on, and they continue to do a lot of awesome work. So just really appreciate it. So, Madam Chair, that's all I have to report.
Okay, thank you so much. Chair's report. I don't have anything, but I would like to say that at some point I'd like to talk about, the aging. I had a friend that she became a friend when I first moved down here. I didn't know that many people. And I've been here, it'll be 20 years the end of this year in December, it'll be 20 years that we lived here. And she ran an upholstery business down in Aberdeen. And she's been sewing like this for years. She did some work for me, and I used to go in and talk to her sometimes. She really became a pretty good friend. And I found out, I went down there to see her last week, and her sister was there, and they told me that she died. And I was just shocked. And I found out she was going back and forth from Cameron to Aberdeen all these years, driving back and forth. And they told me that I found she was 90 years old. And what happened was she fell. She fell at her house. And I don't know if we promote getting those necklaces, I don't know what you call them, alarm. If somebody falls, they can call somebody. They don't have to try to crawl. And but I at some point I'd like to talk to probably the aging department about that. That's the only thing I wanted to say. I just took a moment to say that to you guys because I feel very strong about it now. And that's the end of what I have to say. And I don't know if you have any comments on it, if you know people that you feel that the aging population or that should be mentioned or thrown in the mix as far as trying to get people to wear those, or if they do, but just food for thought. Now we can go ahead into closed session.
Well, I just want to add a comment for Buzz Slaughter, our chair. Lee started several months ago a discussion in Johnston County for to put together a water sewer authority concept, and that meeting was scheduled for tonight. He will not schedule it for the fourth Wednesday in the future. But he wished he could be here, but he is chairing that meeting, and unfortunately, you can't chair two meetings at one time.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm sorry, I should have acknowledged both the chair and the vice chair. They couldn't be here, but I'm looking forward to working with them and seeing them at the next meeting. So here I am, and I guess does anybody else have anything that they want to say before we go into closed session?
No, move to go into closed session.
Okay. Closed session pursuant to NCGS 143-31811A6 to conduct annual performance review of the executive director. We are now in closed session. Oh, I'm sorry, I need a motion for that to go into closed session.
I did make the motion, there needs to be a second.
Okay,
Kathleen Ferguson Hillsborough made the motion.
okay,
Rebecca Salmon Sanford, second.
okay, thank you so much. All right, we're now in closed session.
Well, we have to vote.
We have to do a quick roll call, so I'll do that.
All in favor, we gotta do roll call.
Yeah, sorry, everyone. All right, one more time for closed session. As a reminder, one vote only per community. Apex. Aberdeen.
Aye.
Chatham County.
Mike Dasher, aye.
Thank you. City of Durham.
Adriana Freeman, aye.
Durham County.
Heidi Carter, I.
Hillsborough.
Kathleen Ferguson, Hillsborough, I.
Johnson County, Lee County,
Lee County, Bill Carlo, aye.
Moore County, Orange County, Pittsburgh, Princeton,
Don Rains, Princeton, I.
Sanford,
Rebecca Salmon, City of Sanford, I.
and Wake County. And we have a unanimous vote to go into closed session.